Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of Crafting Leadership podcast. So my name is Mark. I'm the principal craftsperson at Codurance. Today, we are joined for the first time. We have Sam, who some of you may know from our Deciphering Modernization podcast, which if you're not already subscribed, you think you should, basically. But Sam, would you like to give a quick introduction?
Yeah, so special guest today, I suppose, from the other podcast. Thanks very much, Mac. I've been at Codurance quite a while now, and in the industry, and as you know from the other podcast, working a lot in software modernization, but also very passionate about leadership, which is why I'm here today. So looking forward to it.
Cool, happy to have you with us. And we also have our usual guests. So Simon.
Hi there. Yeah, cheers, Mike. And so I'm Simon Shaw. I'm the regional director for Codurance in Manchester and Leeds. Good to be here today.
And Alan.
Yeah, hi, I'm Alan, regional director for Codurance in London.
Awesome. So So last two episodes we were focusing solely on that project mission and vision and how that is important. And it's important, obviously, before you start, it's important to make sure it's refined and it's still there as the project goes on. But like we know, as all of us are, in IT, but in general, at some point in any project, there may be situations when things go south, right? And usually when they go south, according to Murphy's Law, like everything goes down. It's like a lot of things go south. So I just wanted to have a chat today about how to deal with this kind of situations where, there are creeping deadlines, there's still tons of things to do. There may be a major production deployment and there are many bugs out of that and the clients are phoning and you need to do something quickly about it. There's maybe some short notice audit, for example, it may happen as well. But in general, it's about you may need to pull on many strings at certain points. And there may be a lot of problems of varying degree. There may be a small time window to take action. And in general, not to fall in the trap of trying to do too many things at once and spreading your team too thin and eventually not accomplishing anything for a quite substantial amount of time. So, but before we go into that, I just want to know your opinion around how maybe we can prevent such situations, or can we prevent or prepare in some way for these kind of situations? I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that. So basically planning for contingency. And
I mean, you absolutely can take action ahead of time to try and sort of manage those risks and head off the events. If you understand your project environment or the situation you're in really well, and you spend a lot of time and effort into trying to understand it, then you give yourself the best chance possible. I mean, there's obviously traditional project management techniques around risk management and the sort of production of RAID logs and all these kind of things, which force you to look at these problems from a variety of different angles and, if done properly, come up with effective mitigation strategies to at least either minimize the damage, avoid it, shift the risk, these kind of things. I think the problem I've seen mostly with the way some people approach this is they use risk management as a way of covering their backsides, if you like. So very often RAID logs are used to just write stuff down and said, well, I wrote it down, that's me done. That's not what they're there for at all. You're supposed to go to that next step of then producing an effective plan to reduce the effect of whatever might happen. I think there's well-established techniques and processes for trying to deal with these kind of problems. You can't cover everything, because if you knew something was going to happen, it'd already be an issue. But you can plan for the worst, definitely.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I think I'm always slightly skeptical when I see what I would label as overly ambitious plans or roadmaps. I think it's best to assume that things will crop up that you just can't anticipate, that you didn't expect. So, don't set out with an incredibly, tightly coupled plan with pieces of work, dropping nicely and then flowing into another, and assume that you are going to uncover rocks. There's a really nice phrase in a book I read recently by a guy called John Smart, who wrote Sooner, Safer, Happier, and he said, impediments aren't in the path, impediments are the path. And that's it's the team's job to navigate around them. And you can't anticipate them, but you can and should anticipate that there will be challenges. So I think Alan's spot on there. Don't rely on logging things in a risk log or a spreadsheet. That's not what it's about. It's about, to a degree, I think, going back to first principles and ensuring that teams limit the work in progress. I think that's a key thing, isn't it? So the teams can remain focused. And then when things do crop up, and they inevitably will, about having transparent conversations around optionality, and if we deal with this, it might have an impact here. That's risk management. That's escalation, isn't it? Really, it's dealing with things as they arise.
Yeah, while it's a project management or delivery management discipline, it's everyone's responsibility. The person in that role, whoever's filling that role of keeping an eye on these things and making sure the process is followed, is ultimately accountable for the success of it. But you need input from everyone, and you need everyone to take ownership of the risks in a project and what's going to happen. It's no good anybody to someone that's not my thing and that's out of my control, because you need all eyes on if you want to do the best job possible. So it's important not to blame people when things go wrong, not to tightly couple roles too much to certain areas, and to encourage expertise to be shared. And if you do those things, and then put the paper pushing elements in place as well. So around the logging and the review of those points, you stand a chance. But the history of running any kind of project, let alone a software project, will tell you that you're never going to cover everything off. So there's an element that you need to prepare to be reactive as well, but there's not an excuse for not doing your due diligence and not following good practice in the lead up.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, Alan. I like that focus on team as well. I think that's a really, really fundamental point here, in that if something is blocked and it's something that's something that's important that needs delivering, that has some value assigned to it, and you can't progress, then unless you really have to, I don't think the team should park that work. I think the opposite should apply, really. The team should swarm on it and work out how they're going to unblock that, clear the blocker, and then move on. I think it's always a bit of a red flag when you see stuff being part. Oh, we'll get to that. That's when you get into that kind of tech debt cycle, or leaving stuff to the end and hoping you'll have a heroic final sprint. That rarely happens.
But I mean, escalating things you haven't got control over is a valid strategy. Those paths should be set for people and the boundaries understood. Asking somebody to make a difficult decision, that's a perfectly valid approach to something. The team shouldn't just sort of suffer to the nth degree trying to fix everything themselves. So that I think that's where the lack of blame comes in. If they feel comfortable saying they don't know, they can't, I think that really helps you avoid those pinch points as well, because they don't get to a point where it's just too late to escalate and get a decision without really annoying a senior stakeholder or somebody like that at the same time. So yeah, I mean, it's a cultural thing, risk management. How you view risk, how you approach it, how you discuss it and deal with it. It's very cultural, I think. But yeah, perfectly plausible to avoid the worst of the storm. There's no need to drive right into the middle of it, even if you lose your wig on the outskirts, maybe.
I think one other aspect of it as well is I feel like having a strong, well-functioning team is another aspect of contingency. If you have like a smooth running team, then when you do encounter these maybe unforeseen issues, and you really do truly get things that you couldn't have foreseen up front, then I think the team are in a better place to confront those and to deal with them. When they're a more smooth running team, they have a good planning process, etc., etc. They're doing some form of experimentation. and getting answers, and sort of on a smaller level, identifying risks, even on like a story or like feature level as well. I've seen this work really well. If not just like maybe the project or initiative level, but actually even on a story level, if you're able to spot risks and find ways to mitigate them or find out the answers earlier via experimentation, then I think that puts the team in a much better place when you get them either at that same level or at a much larger level. You get these say issues that you have to overcome. Then I think that can really help.
I think that's really good like summary of this section, Sam, where actually like in the modern IT world where it's it's all about usually agile methodologies, like you should be able, based on all the feedback that you're constantly getting between the team members and the team lead and the team members, and the feedback is constantly exchanged, like those risks, even small, they should be spotted quite early thanks to that, right? So you should not go for someone like a risk manager in the team, obviously. Like you should trust like this agile process that through all of this feedback, those risks and potential problems, they should be spotted quite early, right? For the things really go south, ideally.
I mean, the whole agile methodology is a response to typical recurring risks that happened in software projects prior to its existence, right? The risks that come with doing things in a waterfall way. So, the risk of doing some things in a particular order and having to see that order through and then go right back to the beginning and do it all again was, what are the risks of that? You get to the end, you spend a lot of time and money, it's gone wrong. You have to go back to the beginning and it's very expensive to start that process again, right? So you've got massive cost and time risk, delivery reliability risk. Breaking things into smaller increments and having regular reviews and closer involving stakeholders is all there just to manage those risks. And I think in IT, we just think of it as the way we do things, but it's all a risk mitigation strategy. And it's addressing actually the most important risks in projects. That affect the final outcome of a project. That's why it exists. And again, it's cultural, right? It's how you think about risks, how you think about your stakeholders, how you think about your role in the process of producing software. You have a responsibility to provide transparency, gain feedback, to talk regularly with the customer, to sort of own your output. Even the little psychological tricks about moving things across the Scrum board are there to mitigate the risk of people feeling detached from the process or disenfranchised or having too long between those little endorphin rushes you get from getting a sign off. They're all there to mitigate problems that have historically existed in software. And if you didn't do these things, you talk about the storm, you're just ignoring it. You're just pretending it's not there and then hoping it goes away by the time you finally arrive. We address that through Agile by saying, no, we'll drive through 1,000 little storms rather than careering headlong into a big one and hoping we get through it. It's all there for that. Everything you do is risk management, really.
Right. Okay. So we have a couple of options, let's say, for us, and like how we can mitigate the risk. And sometimes, depending on the methodology that we use, it can be like a natural part of that methodology, right? But we know, all of us, that at some point things may go south. You never know, right? An IT project, after the first release, after the first merge, even various things may start to happen. So let's imagine we have that situation, right? There are a lot of things that popped up, a lot of bugs in the system, for example, and a lot of people are asking us to fix them because they depend on that system working properly. So let's focus on the strategy again, right? So the prioritize and execute, which is at its core, it's about evaluating the situation first, right? Then deciding with your team what would be the most important, the highest priority item to pick up. Then make sure that most of the resources are assigned to that. And so once that is fixed, then just repeat the process, basically. But also saw another version of it where actually before you go into the first critical thing, big thing, you actually try to clear the ground a bit and maybe take care of some maybe lower hanging fruit so that these are out of the way and you can show actually some kind of a progress before you go into something major. So I just wanted to know your thoughts about the process and that alternative to it.
Give an example of a project which I inherited, which required this kind of thinking. So one of my first consultancy projects ever, I landed in, and they were all very happy with the progress they were making. They were going to deliver 2 months down the line, I think it was. And everybody seemed quite satisfied with how fast they were going and how much they were doing. And then I asked our senior people in the project, first thing was, I guess evaluate the situation, right? So land and say, when are we going to finish? They say, well, the deadline's 20th of December, whatever it was. I was like, okay, but when are we going to finish? And the question was, well, we're nearly done with the functionality. And I was like, yeah. You keep asking the same question. No one's answered it yet, right? So when are you going to finish? And they said, well, there's quite a few bugs. How many bugs? Well, we're doing those in a bug sprint at the end. Okay. How many are there? And then they wouldn't answer. So I go digging and I find out that there are way more bugs than there are hours in the day between now and the deadline. And the decision had been made on the project prior to me arriving that we needed to show progress on the functionality. The demos needed to be good. Everything needed to look good. And all we were doing was stacking up problems. So the first decision I got to make on that project was to go to the senior managers and the stakeholders and tell them that we weren't going to work on any new features until the bugs were gone. And the simple reason for that was I told them we couldn't tell them when we were going to finish. And they didn't like that very much. So I said, if you want me to tell you when we're going to finish, we need to stop working on features. We need to work on bugs. And that will help. Then getting them bought into that then allowed me to go back to the team and make a very, simple statement to them. Said, you stop working on features, you start working on bugs until you can tell me with some level of confidence whether we're all getting some time off over Christmas. Because if you can't, if we get to Christmas and it's not done, then we're all canceling holiday and this gets a bit rough, and I don't want to do that. So that was relatively straightforward, but it was about understanding the risks to our reputation and to the to the team welfare and all the other kind of things that come with just ignoring a massive great problem that's looming in the process. So yeah, I guess that was it. So I've evaluated it, lay it out nice and simple for people, and then try and move forward.
So that was, I guess, the priority was the whole making sure that all the bugs are fixed before any features are done. But
it's being honest with yourself about whether you're done or not. Like a piece of software with a load of bugs in it is not a finished piece of software. It's a piece of junk, right? So you have to be honest with yourself about the risks that you're choosing to absorb at that point and what that means for you, and then you can make a decision. I mean, I took that to people who would be interested and asked them to make a decision, but I was determined to present them with the reality of the situation and not some covered up version of whatever they'd been told up to now. There was a lot of shouting.
But so when you decided to do that and you got the green lights, did you also apply this prioritize and execute to that backlog of bugs, let's say? Because you can imagine a situation, I guess, where the decision was made, but at some point they may come back. It's like it's been some time. I know there are still some bugs, but we have to go back no matter what to do.
Yeah, so the bugs were, part of the process is to classify the bugs, right? But at that point, nobody knew they existed and nobody was involved in trying to fix them. They just thought everything was fine. So once you got the buy-in from people that this is a problem, you can then engage the people who need to make that decision in prioritizing that bug list and deciding what can exist beyond the first release and what can't. But you've got to lift the lid on it. Well, I had to lift the lid on it first in order to break that kind of culture of hiding information, important information, and ignoring risk. So once we've done that, prioritize them, work out what's important, work out what's not, get agreement with the buy-in with the stakeholders, including the team, on what's possible to fix and replan. But don't just carry on until all of a sudden you give it, because it would have, in this case, it went to a third party to then do what they called factory acceptance testing. So it went outside of the supplier and to somebody else. And it was just going to be a nightmare. But everybody seemed quite happy with that at the time, or at least they're drifting along, not choosing not to deal with it. So yeah, you know, those kind of situations require someone to take some action and a bit of courage from the people involved to deal with things.
Yeah, it's definitely an angle here of stop starting and start finishing, which I know is a cliche, but it's partly a cliche because it's a kind of well-earned one, really. And I think there's possibly also something here in terms of where you are in the delivery or on the product delivery life cycle. So, you know, I'd suggest that if you've recently launched, you know, your MVP product and it's now being used by real customers, it's it's operational, then I think it really is beneficial for teams from a planning perspective to think about how they're allocating their time. So I would, suggest teams kind of plan a little bit conservatively. So if a product's just launched, don't allocate 100% of the team's time to building more features. Anticipate that there are going to be production issues, and you're going to respond to customers asking questions, or customers are going to find defects that you didn't find when you were doing your own testing. You have to be able to respond to those. So anticipate that as best you can. I've seen suggestions that no more than 80% of a team's time should be allocated to new features, or that kind of metric, and allow at least a proportion of time for addressing production incidents and bugs. And I think that's a really kind of healthy way of approaching it. Then everyone understands that we're only probably going to be able to build these features now we've launched this MVP in the next sprint or the next period, whatever that may be, because we're assuming that we're going to have to deal with stuff in life.
So I guess, Simon, it's very important to communicate that to up the chain of command.
Correct.
Clearly.
Yeah.
That 20% or whatever, that you cannot put 100% of your resources to whatever the business requires in terms of new features. So I guess you would say that it's paramount to, as early as possible, communicate that to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it is, and I think the message is, it should be a well received, and it should be a fairly well understood message. There, shouldn't it? That look, we're going to prioritize dealing with customers because we're now in a live production scenario. We're no longer just building something before we've launched. We have launched. Customers are now using this product. We want to support them as quickly and as well as we can. So to do that, we're going to preserve some of our time now to deal with things. There's that kind of nice analogy of when the tide drops, that's when you see the rocks, but they haven't just appeared. They were always there. It's that kind of sense, isn't it? Again, back to what we were talking about at the outset, really, anticipate that you are going to have to deal with things which you can't necessarily see right now. How do you do that? It's difficult, but it's not impossible. You prepare for that by allowing a proportion of the team's time to deal with that sort of thing when it comes up. But you're right, Mac, communicate and make sure that's well understood, rather than telling people as it happens or after the event.
Mm-hmm.
So in that example, Simon, how do you, I had a recent sort of challenge. How do you get past, well, why has my software got bugs? Why do you need 20% of people's time? Why have you produced something that requires so much support? You offer it up as a mitigation strategy. So I'm going to put 20% of people's time aside. And then someone says, well, why do we need that? You should just get it right first time.
Mm-hmm.
How do you kind of address those kind of concerns?
Well, I think because you're not always sure how customers are going to use the product, and maybe customers are going to request things that are deemed to be important that need delivering straight away, and you want to be able to respond to those because you're building it for your customers to use it. So I think you're doing it because I think the message is you're doing it because you're prioritizing your customers and their needs and their demands. So I think that's how I'd respond to that one, Alan.
I think as well, one thing that's interesting is, depends on how you evaluate the situation, your highest priority might be different. Someone might look at a situation where you say you have lots of bugs being reported by your users and say we should jump straight on the bugs, but not recognize that actually the feedback loop is maybe really slow and it's coming from the users and not, say, the infrastructure. There's things in place to actually say, well, something's not right here. And then maybe even before that as well, like if you can catch things before you even deploy, then having those feedback loops in place can actually or should potentially be the highest priority, as well as looking at the bugs that are being reported. So it's like a combination. It's not necessarily one or the other, but it can be a combination, like a hybrid approach, where you maybe have to do some of the tactical work. Let's fix some of these bugs. They're actually stopping us from making money right now, whilst also putting the feedback loops in place to actually try and stop this situation. Otherwise, you're going to sort of be in this this circle forever and ever and ever, and it won't stop.
So yeah, I think it's important to challenge those things as well. You know, it's important to constantly ask: is there any more we can do? Is there anything? You know, that we can't. To a point, you shouldn't just accept that things are inevitable. You know, there are always new ideas and new techniques and new minds within the team that might bring different perspectives to a problem. So it's worth constantly addressing your assumptions and your plans to try and get ahead of it where you can.
Also, be very transparent, like from the very beginning. That's why it's key, right, with your stakeholder, because again, it might be like a startup thing or a greenfield projects, which actually, you know, the business really wants to get it out as soon as possible, basically. So, okay, you need to say, okay, that's fine, but be aware that once we release this, we need probably a large amount of our time after a few weeks of that initial release for any problems that occur. Or you give us more time before that release for a more holistic approach so that we can spend more time on testing and maybe some fast feedback pipelines or any kind of automation that would, you know, safeguard us from any like those let's say non-deterministic situations once we get to the production, let's say. Exactly.
Yeah, and the stakeholders, you know, your key project sponsor or somebody like this, the person you're sort of ultimately reporting to and delivering can very often, I think, mistakenly be seen as somebody to get past and get round and to sort of manage, you know, if you know what I mean, in that respect. But they're potentially your biggest advocate and your biggest asset. You know, that's really what they should be. But you've got to spend the time to find out what floats their boat. You know, what do they really want out of this? What's important to them? What, you know, is it really? Do they really care if there's bugs in production, or do they more care that they didn't know about them and now they're hearing about them in front of their boss or something like this? Or do they really care about the delivery deadline, or do they care about the delivery cost? You know, what bits of this complex equation are they particularly focused on? And then you can then work with them to make sure that they that the delivery and the communication around the delivery is focused on their needs, and then they become an advocate for you. And they'll do a lot of the hard work for you in terms of managing the message and keeping the pressure off the team and allowing you to focus on the things that need to be focused on, such as quality and delivery. You just won't get that kind of the noise that comes with people just being annoyed and feeling like they're not getting what they want, you know, because people react weirdly when they feel like their interests aren't being looked after, especially if they're in a senior role in a company and they're under pressure already. So your risk management approach and how you do things, it needs to be, you know, not only tailored to what you assume to be important, it needs to be tailored to what your key stakeholders believe to be important, whether you agree with them or not. You know, it's just life. You have to factor that in as a major part of your thinking.
Yeah, and as a team lead, that's always a trade-off, right? You need to take under consideration, right, what your stakeholders they expect from you.
Yeah, and you need to get your team to understand that as well. It's no good them thinking that the stakeholder is, you know, doesn't care about software or only cares about deadlines, or the deadline's arbitrary and all this kind of stuff that you hear quite a lot come out of teams, right? It's no good for anyone. Why would you want to try and deliver something with that mindset? You know, that you think as a leader, you've got a duty to get them on board and to to stop that kind of corrosive talk within the team around why things are being done and decisions are being made. You need to understand it and you need to communicate that, and you need to bring people together around it. Otherwise, you know, it becomes very problematic, I think.
Full transparency. Okay, what do you guys think about because, you know, for each strategy there's always some like tools and techniques, and one of them which I saw, and I'm interested whether you used it and what was your experience, if so, so that when actually things go south, there are a lot of things you need to fix, let's say. And need to focus on the critical ones, but there's a lot of noise usually around that. There are a lot of people to manage that come and complain, but you know, they distract the team, so to speak, from what they need to focus on. So there is this idea of having one person in the team trying to handle the noise, let's say, around that, that situation, that unfolded. So that's the rest of the team can focus most of the time on that critical thing they need to fix. So I'm just wondering your thoughts about it.
I think it works really well, and I've seen it time and time again work really well. I think one thing you have to be careful of is making sure that there's a skill match between what the thing that they're, say, guiding a team from. Maybe they're dealing with a new stakeholder. Someone from sales needs a particular requirement. You need to make sure there's a good skill match so the person that's doing that role can do it, it's effective. Because otherwise what can happen is they'll volunteer, they'll give it a go, which I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad thing. However, they can then bring the noise back to the team, which is the thing you wanted to avoid in the first place. So if you do want to sort of coach someone in that, maybe two people act as this role within the team, but you make sure that one of them definitely has the skills to be able to handle it and can potentially bring that person up whilst doing it. Because just be aware of the skills mismatch in that. But I think it works really well and can really leave the team to focus on what they want to focus on right now. However, that doesn't mean they still won't get maybe distractions from elsewhere or things come in, but for like the bigger things, this works really well to sort of shield the team.
Yeah, I think that's I think this happens regardless of whether you do it consciously or not. So you're better off trying to do it consciously, I think, and for exactly the reasons Sam said. Not the first person to stick their hand up and say they want to do this is not necessarily going to be the right person. Some people just kind of like conflict. Some people want to be a hero. Some people want to, do all these kind of things. These are not good reasons to do the job. You need somebody generally, like you say, as a personality match or a skills match for the specific situation, somebody with the right sort of level of tact and diplomacy, and also a mature head, enough experience to filter out what should come back to the team and what shouldn't, and what should go out from the team and what shouldn't. Because if you just bring everything in and take everything out, you'll cause more problems than you solve. So it's a subtle art form doing this role really well, but I think it exists in every team, whether you've done it on purpose or not.
Yeah, exactly. And just from my experience, again, it's a very interesting strategy, and generally it works. But from what I saw, it's good to rotate that person every now and then, because it's a very taxing position, especially if you as a lead give it to one of your team members. Maybe they were not in that, let's say, because it's literally almost like taking some kind of a leadership in terms of like engaging with other parts of the organization. It's at this point. So just make sure that the morale is drained quickly for that person, let's say, while they're on that position.
Yeah, being effective at this is really tough, because otherwise you're just kind of passing pieces of paper. Actually being effective at resolving issues and moving things forward is not an easy skill to have. It tends to be built over years and years of doing it badly, and then figuring out ways that it works. But it often falls, doesn't it? It often falls to delivery managers, tech leads, in our case, engagement managers. By default, we end up in this role naturally, but it doesn't have to be like that. There'll be certain problem spaces within the team, certain situations where there'll be somebody else who's much better qualified to do it, and being able to recognize that is really important.
Or maybe it's a good opportunity, maybe to give someone opportunity that maybe would like to be a lead or take the leadership at some point. There's like opportunity for him or her, like to get a taste of it, let's say, in some way.
Yeah, you got to be careful when you do it, but yeah, absolutely. I think you want to put people in situations where they can either succeed or they will at least learn and not be too damaged by it. But the only way to learn is to do it, and hopefully someone supports you while it happens.
Okay, so getting on to our last points of the agenda. So after the battle, let's say, right? So we managed to fix all the problems. We are successful in that. But what's next? What should we do directly after that very stressful time? maybe do some specific preventive actions, maybe to talk specifically to our leadership about something so that they give us more time to regroup, for example, or celebrate a bit. What do you think is the right thing to do after this kind of a stressful situation?
I think all those things are important. Actually, I think some time to decompress seems to be the term in vogue right now, doesn't it? But I think that's important. Again, I'd certainly some acknowledgement, some opportunity to celebrate success. You know, particularly if it's been a most are, of course. Let's face it. You know, if it's been a difficult delivery project, a difficult launch of a project, a product, something like that. I think that's really important. And again, you know, it's probably going back to a theme we touched on a couple of times. I think don't plan, you know, immediately after you've finished a piece of work or launched a product, launched an MVP. Don't fill up your next tranche of work, whether it's a sprint or something analogous to that, with another pile of features to build. I think you know, I think teams would find that a bit dispiriting. Oh, we've just got over this hill, been a big effort to go live, and we're straight into, you know, the next day we're straight into building more features, or we're just continuing at that pace. I think some time to reflect, sometimes to celebrate, and also really importantly, some time to have a think about what went well, what didn't go well, what might we do in terms of learning as a team. That's really important, and actually supports that kind of concept of, you know, go a bit slower, ultimately to go faster. So perhaps just take a little bit of time to breathe, think about how ways of working, how we're approaching things like tech debt, how the team's set up, who's doing that role that we just mentioned a minute or so ago. I think all that is really important and valuable, and actually ultimately it's time well spent, because it can then make for a healthier team, a more effective team, and you get stuff done, you know, more efficiently. So I think it's good investment of time to take some time for whatever period feels appropriate, whatever you think you need, rather than just bouncing straight into the next big thing.
So I completely agree with that sentiment. You know, I think it's important that whoever you're working with, working for, understands that you need that time. Absolutely. Because if you think the best athletes in the world just keep going and going and going and going and don't have time to rest, and not just rest, but those smaller rests in between their workouts, etc. You know, you need to look back at what you've done, right? You know, and that could be, you look back at what you did yesterday, you look back at what you did over the past week, you look forward to what you're going to be doing tomorrow, what you're going to be doing the next week, you know, next month, etc. You know, you need that time to look both ways. I'm not about crossing roads here, but you should do that as well. But I think it's really, really important that you have that time to look back at what you've done, and then also make decisions about what your next moves are as well, because that's really important. I feel, to have that time, and as I said, you should do that continuously, not just like wait for the end of your sprint if you're working in sprints, or, you know, you should have this time. Maybe you've done these 3 stories as part of an epic, and you know, this is a good time to take a pause. This is what we've done, this is our next moves, etc. You know, I think you need to do it continuously in this type of work.
Yeah, I think like the stopping and celebrating things always the first thing. I think you got to acknowledge the work that's been put in. If you've got yourself in a real bind, chances are you've had to do some pretty extraordinary things to get out of it. Work all weekend, like 14-hour days, you know, people doing overtime for nothing. There's these sorts of things happen. And it's really important to go around and thank everybody for that, and to acknowledge what you achieved, even if it's not what you wanted to achieve when you set out. But then equally, once the dust has settled, you need to go back and figure out how you got yourself in that situation in the first place. And the big mistake I see being made in the past is that you try and look for silver bullets, things that will fix it and guarantee it will never happen again. It's not useful in most cases. What you're going to go back is look into, how could I improve my risk analysis and mitigation strategies, my engagement with stakeholders? So how can I just improve things a little bit and see if we can at least shave the really rough edges off of what's happened. If you can fix it, fantastic. But most of the time, setting yourself up to just find a solution to whatever happened means that whatever you come up with, it becomes very narrow and specific to the situation that you were in before, and isn't actually that useful to where you find yourself next time, because next time it will be different. so you're better off reviewing, I think, broader themes in terms of how you analyze the situation, how you mitigate the risk, how you involve the team and the people, and seeing where you can make incremental improvements for that. But I like sort of comparing sort of sporting analogies are difficult, right? With real life, because it's such an extreme situation. But I know when you train for something, if you train for like a marathon or something like this, you see this kind of incremental step up in training, and then every 3 or 4 weeks you'll see a drop back. You'll see, like, the training, any good training plan will recommend every 3 or 4 weeks you take a step back and you have not a rest week but a low week, and you recover, and the idea is the training sinks in and you get a bit of time to review whether your body's hurting too much or not enough, or are you seeing the gains in the distance and time progress that you're measuring. Are you seeing those things? And then once you've had your down week, you go back and you start stepping it up again, and you go back and you try and reach a higher point before the next down week. And that kind of thing I've never really sort of thought about in terms of how we deliver the software, but maybe there's some kind of cadence to our sprints that we need to think about to stop burnout and allow time for reflection, where we expect, right, an increasing velocity. I guess at least this is what people come to. They go, well, the velocity of the team will pick up as we go, as they get more familiar, they find their feet with the domain. It's like, well, maybe we shouldn't be expecting that to be sort of a continuing thing. Maybe we should be giving the team, building every 3 sprints, say, a sprint where we take a step back. Don't do things like, oh, we'll have a bug fixing sprint, because that just encourages everyone not to fix the bugs in the previous sprint. But have a more of a I don't know what you'd call it without annoying people. Not a rest sprint. I can imagine that causing chaos when you told people you were going to do that. But you know what I mean. Maybe there's a place for stepping back and relieving the pressure a little bit before going again. Give you time to reflect on a regular basis.
Yeah, exactly. So like from my point of view, I always keep like a backlog, or let's say, of innovations or things that ideally we should be doing in terms of having like a holistic approach, let's say, but right now we don't have the time. So ideally your stakeholder every now and then be aware of that backlog and giving you time. But if they don't, I guess that's not the best way in the end. That's this critical situation and this high pressure situation had to happen for him or her to understand that actually you need to have more time for this more holistic approach to what you're doing, so that it does not happen again.
Yeah.
Exactly. Also,
can you imagine the conversation you have though? So right, every 6 weeks we're gonna take 2 weeks where we don't deliver quite as much, and we're all gonna have a bit of we're gonna give our minds and our keyboard hands a bit of a rest. It'd be an interesting one to work out how to try and pitch that, because I think it probably would have genuine benefits, especially in a product environment where the pace can be sort of relentless and never ending.
From my perspective, I was never in a situation that they did not give me and my team time. If I frame things properly, and I was always presenting those things, not at the last minute, but always even from the very beginning. To be honest, I never had a situation, even in like most high pressure situations, where I was like in some like in banking and finance, new API comes out. It's like it's a really tight deadline. It's like you cannot do anything about it. It's a compliance thing, but I still was able to manage to like persuade the stakeholder to give us a bit of time for this holistic approach. Okay, so I think it's time for a small round of summary, I guess. So, guys, what is like one thing that's took away from this very interesting conversation today? There'll be one thing.
I guess for me, it's that you need to take the time for sure, and in different ways. But one way for sure that we discussed was you take the time to evaluate your next move, or your next series of moves. And I think by taking the time to do it, I'm not saying spend 6 months evaluating your next move, but take your time, and then execute and really execute. Don't just say, oh, sit in a meeting room, everyone agrees, yep, this is where we're going to go, and then tomorrow no progress. Actually try and take incremental steps towards it. That's super important.
Yeah, I went on a speed awareness course once, and the guy who's running the course sort of said that if you if you think that every accident you can get yourself into is preventable, then you'll be a better driver. So the idea being that if you accept and you have the mindset that you can prevent any situation from causing you harm or causing you to get into a crash, then you will drive in a way that gives you the best possible chance of that being true. And I think, what I take from this conversation is that you should always work on the idea that you can see things coming and you can work to mitigate those things, and don't sort of ever get to a point where you just think it's out of my control, there's nothing I can do, because even if that's true, it's not a very healthy way to approach the problem, and you will miss opportunities to just make life a little easier for yourself.
Yeah, for me, I think this has just reinforced the importance of not holding back and having good conversations early. Alan put it really well earlier. I think don't try and manage a sponsor or a program director or anything like that. Look to build a good relationship where you can have good, healthy conversations, which might be quite challenging, but better to have them in a timely fashion than just keep your fingers crossed and hope that things will magically get better. It doesn't quite work like that. So be brave, be bold, and have those conversations early, and see governance and project sponsors or program sponsors as tools to help you rather than people or processes to kind of manage your work around. I think that's unhealthy. It's the wrong way to look at it.
Yeah, so from my side, I think it's a really good strategy. I would highly advise of taking it under consideration where you find yourself in a highly pressured situation. A lot of things are happening you need to deal with, but always keep in mind that before putting your hands on that first critical major thing to tackle, maybe think about those like smaller, lower hanging fruits. Maybe fixing them won't have as much impact, but it will have an impact on your and team's mental states, and give yourself and team a bit of a confidence boost. And you're already having that knowledge that you fix something before you go that major critical thing, basically. So that's my couple of cents. Cool. Thank you very much, everyone. Sam, hope we'll see you again and again.
I hope so too.
Podcast. So,
I hope so too.
awesome.
It's been fun.
Awesome. Thank you very much, guys. Yeah, like and subscribe, and I see you during the next episode. Take care, everyone.
Cheers. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.